Let's start with something simple. Close your eyes for a second and think about the last time you felt truly alone. Not just physically alone, but alone in the universe. Like nothing out there cared whether you lived or died. It's a heavy feeling, right? Almost unbearable. Now, here's the question. What did your brain do with that feeling? For most people throughout history, the answer has been the same. The brain reached out. It looked for something bigger, something that was watching, something that cared, something that had a plan. And almost every single culture on this planet, no matter how isolated, no matter how different, ended up doing exactly the same thing. They invented gods. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Not whether God exists, that's a different conversation. What we're talking about is something more fundamental, more interesting, and honestly, more unsettling. We're asking whether the idea of God, the feeling of God, the need for God is just built into us, whether it's part of our hardware as human beings. Because if it is, that changes everything about how we think about religion. So let's dig in. About 100,000 years ago, give or take, anatomically modern humans were walking around in Africa. They had the same brains we have now, same size, same structure, same basic wiring. And at some point, these humans started doing something that no other animal on Earth was doing. They started burying their dead with flowers and tools and food. They started painting on cave walls. They started performing rituals. Now, why would they do that? Burying someone with tools makes no survival sense. A dead person cannot use a spear. But the humans doing it believed something. They believed there was somewhere the dead person was going. They believed in something beyond what they could see and touch. This is not a small thing. This is massive. Because this behavior appears independently in virtually every early human culture we have ever found, from Neanderthals in Europe to early humans in the Middle East to ancient populations in Asia and the Americas. The details are different, the gods are different, the stories are different, but the impulse, the raw impulse to believe in something unseen and powerful, that is everywhere. Anthropologists call this cross-cultural universality. When something appears in every human culture across every time period without any contact between those cultures, that's a major signal. It suggests the behavior is not just a cultural invention. It suggests it's coming from somewhere inside the human mind itself. So, the question becomes, why? Why would the human brain do this? Here's where it gets fascinating. Cognitive scientists have spent decades studying how the human brain forms beliefs about agents, meaning beings with intentions, desires, and purposes. And what they found is that our brains are almost embarrassingly bad at staying neutral. There's a concept called the hyperactive agency detection device, which sounds like something from a science fiction movie, but it's actually a very real cognitive tendency. Here's how it works. Imagine your ancient ancestor is walking through tall grass at night. They hear a rustling sound. Now their brain has two options. Option 1, assume it's just the wind. Option 2, assume something is in the grass that wants to eat them. The brains that assumed option 2 survived. The brains that calmly concluded probably just wind sometimes got eaten by lions. So over hundreds of thousands of years, natural selection built us to be trigger-happy with agency detection. We assume intention behind things. We see faces in clouds. We feel like the universe is watching us. We interpret random events as messages. This isn't stupidity. This is a survival mechanism that worked incredibly well for almost our entire history as a species. But the byproduct of that mechanism is that we are constantly, almost automatically, perceiving agents that aren't there. And God, in almost every religious tradition, is the ultimate agent, the agent behind everything, the intention behind the universe itself. Our brains were essentially built for this idea to feel real. But it goes even deeper than that. Humans are also what researchers call intuitive dualists. From a very young age, without any religious teaching at all, children naturally separate the mind from the body. Studies done with young children show that even kids who have never received religious instruction will say that when a person dies, their body stops working, but the person can still know things, still feel things, still be aware. Psychologist Paul Bloom at Yale spent years studying this. He found that children as young as 3 or 4 years old naturally assume that mental life continues after physical death. This isn't something they're taught, it's the default setting of the human mind. And what is the afterlife? What is the soul? These are just that intuition scaled up and given a story. Our brains resist the idea that consciousness is just biology. We feel like the me inside us is separate from our physical body. And once you have that feeling, the idea of a God who is pure consciousness, pure mind with no body at all, fits perfectly with how the human brain already thinks. Now let's talk about something called the teleological stance. Humans don't just see agents everywhere. We see purpose everywhere. We see things as being for something. Children do this constantly. Ask a 4-year-old why rocks exist, and they'll tell you rocks are there so animals can scratch themselves. Ask them why the sun exists, and they'll say the sun is there so we can see. They're not being silly. Their brains are doing exactly what human brains naturally do, which is look for function and purpose in everything. Developmental psychologist Deborah Kellerman has done extensive research showing that this tendency toward seeing purpose doesn't fully disappear in adults. Even scientifically trained adults show traces of it when they're put under time pressure and asked to make quick judgments. And this matters enormously for the God question, because the most emotionally powerful argument for God across all of human history is not a logical proof, it's the feeling that things exist for a reason, the feeling that your life has a purpose, that the universe is not just a random accident, that there's meaning built into existence. That feeling doesn't come from religion, that feeling comes first, and then religion gives it a name and a story. Now here's something really worth sitting with. Researcher Ara Norenzayan wrote a book called Big Gods, where he laid out something genuinely thought-provoking. He argued that while small supernatural beliefs are universal, the specific idea of a single, all-knowing, morally concerned God who watches your behavior and cares whether you're good or bad, that version of God may have evolved as a social technology. Here's the idea. Small groups of humans can be kept in line by reputation. If everyone in your village knows you, you behave well because you'll suffer consequences. But as human societies grew larger, as we started living in cities with strangers, reputation alone wasn't enough. Enter the watching God, a God who sees everything, who knows your secret thoughts, who will punish you even if no human ever finds out what you did. Studies in behavioral economics have shown that even subtle reminders of being watched make people behave more cooperatively with strangers. There's a famous experiment where researchers put a picture of eyes above an honesty box in an office kitchen. People paid 3 times more for their coffee when the eyes were there, even though they knew it was just a picture. Now imagine instead of a picture of eyes, you have the deeply held belief that an all-knowing divine being is watching your every thought and deed. The effect on social behavior would be enormous, and historically it was. Large-scale human cooperation, the building of civilizations, the creation of legal systems and moral codes, all of this seems to have been helped enormously by the idea of a God who enforces the rules even when no human is watching. This is not evidence that God exists, but it is compelling evidence that the specific kind of God that became dominant in human civilization was shaped by what worked, what helped large groups of unrelated strangers live together and cooperate. God, in this view, is at least partly a social invention, not a lie exactly, but a solution that the human mind found to a real problem. Let's also talk about the emotional function of God, because this is probably the hardest part to think about clearly. The universe is genuinely terrifying if you think about it honestly. We are tiny creatures on a small rock orbiting an average star in one of hundreds of billions of galaxies. We live for maybe 80 years if we're lucky. Everyone we love will die. We will die, and the universe will continue without noticing. The human mind did not evolve to deal with that reality without help. We evolved to care deeply about survival, about our children, about our tribe. We evolved to find meaning in the immediate and personal. The cosmic scale of what science has revealed is something our emotional systems were never built for. God solves this. God makes the universe personal again. God means there's someone who knows your name, who notices when you suffer, who has a plan that your life fits into. That is not a small psychological offer. That is an enormous psychological offer. And for most of human history, there was nothing else making that offer. Ernest Becker, the anthropologist and philosopher, argued in his book The Denial of Death that almost all of human culture is essentially a response to the terror of knowing we are going to die. We build monuments, we create legacies, we join movements, we have children, and we believe in God, all as ways of feeling like we matter, like we will persist, like death is not the final word. You don't have to agree with every detail of Becker's argument to recognize that he's pointing at something real. The awareness of death is genuinely unique to humans, and the existence of God is the most direct and powerful answer to that awareness that the human mind has ever produced. So where does all of this leave us? If you take everything we've covered today and you lay it out together, you get a picture that is a little uncomfortable regardless of what you believe. The human brain has agency detection built into its structure. We see intention everywhere. We are natural dualists who feel that mind is separate from matter. We see purpose and meaning in random events. We cooperate better under the gaze of a supernatural authority. We need to feel that our lives matter and that death is not total erasure. And every single one of these tendencies points naturally, almost inevitably, toward the creation of God. This is what researchers like Pascal Boyer, Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, and many others have been arguing for decades. The idea of God is not something that was revealed from outside. It is something that was generated from inside, generated by the structure of the human brain and the emotional needs of the human animal. Boyer's book, Religion Explained, goes through this in remarkable detail. He shows how religious concepts across all cultures follow predictable patterns that match up perfectly with how human memory and cognition work. Religious ideas spread and stick not because they are true, but because they are exactly the right kind of strange, slightly counterintuitive, slightly beyond the normal, but not so alien that the brain can't process them. A God who is everywhere but invisible, a soul that survives death, an afterlife that is like this life but better. These ideas are cognitively sticky because they hit the brain in just the right way. And this brings us to a conclusion that I think is genuinely important. The fact that God is a natural product of the human mind does not automatically mean God is false. That would be the genetic fallacy. Where something comes from doesn't determine whether it's true. But what it does mean is that the feeling of God, the sense that God is real and present and watching, is not itself evidence of God's existence. Because we now have a very good explanation for why that feeling exists that has nothing to do with whether God is actually there. The feeling is a product of brains that were built to detect agents, to crave meaning, to fear death, and to need community. If you feel God, that tells you something profound about your brain. It tells you about your evolutionary history, your cognitive architecture, your emotional needs. It tells you what kind of animal you are. Whether it tells you anything about the universe beyond your skull is a completely separate question. And that question, as honest as we can be about it, remains genuinely open, in a way that the feeling of God does not. We are meaning-making creatures living in a universe that may not have built-in meaning. We are pattern recognition machines scanning a cosmos that may be fundamentally patternless at its deepest levels. We are social animals who need to feel watched in a universe that may be entirely indifferent. Is God part of human nature? The evidence strongly suggests yes. God is what happens when a brain like ours tries to make sense of a universe like this one. What that means about God himself? That's a question each of us has to sit with on our own.